I've always heard that bad preaching takes simple things and makes them complicated. And good preaching takes complicated things and makes them simple. Some of the Old Testament prophets and history books can be tough, sometimes complicated. But hopefully over the coming weeks, I can simplify this Old Testament book of Nehemiah for you. The Old Testament at times can be hard to follow. It can be hard to keep up with the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. Oftentimes the language of the Old Testament, the names and the places and the times can leave us confused as to what we just read. When reading about foreign lands and prophets and patriarchs and kings and battles and kingdoms, we can all have times where we just left scratching our head. Right? I'll give you a quick illustration. A few years after I graduated high school, our high school went through a realignment like a lot of high schools do, and some of the schools that were in our conference had left and some new schools had been added to our conference. And so a couple years after I'd graduated, one evening, me and some friends were sitting around and we decided, hey, our high school basketball team's playing in one of these new schools that just joined at their place. Let's go and watch. So we made the road trip, and this is before GPS and your iPhone can tell you how to get everywhere. So we're struggling to find this little school in the middle of nowhere. So we finally get there and we walk into the gym and we enter about midway through the second quarter. And when we get there, we walk in and this place is going berserk. I mean, these fans are rabid. I'm like, this place is lively to say the least. And we walk in and we sit down with every shot. This gym is just erupting. And then right before halftime, this kid crosses the half-court line and takes about one step inside half-court and he shoots and he makes it as the buzzer goes off right before halftime. And when he did, the place is just jumping out of their seats. So we're confused. We're like, there's no way this place loves basketball this much, and there's no way they're this hyped to play against Chesney. Like, we're not a Super Bowl. So I don't understand what's happening. So we asked the people sitting in front of us, I said, ma'am, do you guys love basketball this much? And the woman turned to me and she said, not normally. But the kid who just hit the shot right before halftime, I said, yeah. She said, that makes 40 points for him in the first half. And we were like, oh my goodness. She said he just started shooting and he wouldn't miss. And with every shot, the gym just built. The energy just built. And everybody just kept wanting him to shoot more and more and more. And he had 40 points at halftime. The Old Testament book of Nehemiah is much, for many of you, you feel just like I did in that gym. I needed somebody to simplify and clarify for me what in the world is going on. Because I know there's no way they love basketball this much. Some of you need me or someone to help you with, even with the Old Testament, but especially the book of Nehemiah, to just say, Pastor, you have to simplify for us what's going on. So I hope I can do that for you over this sermon and over the coming weeks. This week I had someone text me and said, Pastor, I took you up on your offer to start reading through the book of Nehemiah. And here's the exact text I am quoting. They said, Pastor, I read Nehemiah and I felt like I was scooping buckets of water out of a boat with a hole in it. That's probably how some of you felt when I was reading it, right? You're like, Pastor, I don't know what you're reading or even what you're saying. Nehemiah at first glance can feel that way. You can feel like you just walked into a gym that's going crazy over something. You're like, I don't understand what's happening. When I introduce certain names in the Bible, you quickly know what to respond. If I say Adam, you probably say Eve or sin. If I'd say Noah, you'd say Ark. If I said David, you'd say Goliath. If I said Moses, you'd say 10 Commandments. If I said Peter, you'd probably say denial, Judas, betrayal. If I said Paul, you might say Damascus Road. But if I said Nehemiah, what would you say? Most people, I don't know. Now, some of you who maybe grew up in church your whole life, maybe you've read through the Bible a couple of times, you might say, he's the guy who did some kind of rebuilding. He's the builder of the walls of Jerusalem. But Nehemiah is not a book that most Christians run to. Most of you didn't go home on these last 2 snow weekends and think, I'm excited. I got to go home and read Nehemiah. Most people don't feel that way. Matter of fact, unless you have some through the Bible reading plan that annually takes you through the Bible, some of you may have even never read the book. Truth be told, some of you might have said this morning, Pastor, until you said turn to Nehemiah, I wasn't even sure Nehemiah was a book of the Bible. So my goal through this series is to help you to value the Old Testament, understand it, apply it to your life, not just for mental growth, but for spiritual growth and transformation. In its most simple form, Nehemiah is a book about a man by that name who God will use to rebuild broken walls around Jerusalem and restore God's people to worship. Pastor, well, we don't need a wall built around Northbrook. We don't need a wall built around Lincoln County, so why does this text apply to us? Well, it's going to show us, church, this book over the coming weeks, you're going to see this continual struggle of wanting to do the work of God in a world that opposes the work of God. Of wanting to follow what God would have you do in a world that opposes the work of God. Nehemiah is going to show us this. Nehemiah is going to do the work of God in a world that opposes that work. The overarching theme of Nehemiah is that the obedience to God, it doesn't remove opposition from our lives, church. Sometimes it invites it. Sometimes when you're obedient to God, it doesn't remove opposition. Sometimes it invites it. It'll also teach us what can be accomplished when God's people will work together. When God's people will lock arms and work together and realize that we're on the same team. We realize that we in this together. To realize you're not my enemy. We are in this together. And there's no limit to what can be accomplished when God's people will work together. Nehemiah is going to show us that over the coming weeks. This morning I want to introduce you to a man that's going to parallel Nehemiah. His name is William Wilberforce. Anybody ever heard of this guy? I had never heard of him until I began to study this book. He lived in 18th century England, and listen to me, in his early 20s, he landed a job in the British Parliament. In his early 20s. And this job allowed him to become best friends with the Prime Minister. But then something happened to this guy named William Wilberforce, and he experienced this true conversion to Christianity. This deep conversion, this studying of the Scriptures, this prayer and fasting and seeking the face of God. None of this, he raised his hand at a concert. None of this, he just filled out a piece of paper to be. No, he was seeking who God is. And he converted to Christianity. And in doing so, he began to ask this question: does God want me in some type of ministry work, or does He want me to stay in government? And he couldn't escape this feeling that God had placed him in government work for that time. And so he began to open his eyes to what was going on in England and around the world. And he began to notice this injustice of slave trade. And so William Wilberforce began to offer bills in the British Parliament. He began to offer bills to stop the transatlantic slave trade. He saw that his country was working slaves to death, taking people from other countries, shackling them and bringing them in and working them to death. And he began to say, this ain't right. So he began to offer bills to put a stop to it. Bill after bill after bill was rejected and rejected and rejected. And then very late in his life, at the age of 74, after 40 years of doing this over and over and over and being rejected, Wilberforce recognized something. He believed. He believed that faithfulness to God was more important than the speed at which things get done. So he continued to be faithful. And at age 74, with his health failing and his eyesight almost completely gone, he gets a phone call or a message. He got a text message at 74 that said the British Empire had voted to end slavery. 3 days later, he died. Some men give their lives to worthy and noble causes, and some men trifle with trinkets that will one day be worthless. The biblical narrative of Nehemiah is closely aligned to this guy named Wilberforce. You're going to see as we begin to study Nehemiah. Listen, William Wilberforce worked in government. Nehemiah works in government. Wilberforce was close to the prime minister. Nehemiah is close to the king. Wilberforce was broken for people's lives. Nehemiah is going to be broken for people's lives. Wilberforce had used his position for godly impact. Nehemiah is going to use his position for godly impact. Mount Vernon, God did not put you here today in this culture, in this community, and in this church, in this time by accident. God did not put you in here this morning by accident. He put you here for a reason, on purpose. You are not here to just say, I think I just come to hear sermons and go on with my life. No, God put you here for a very specific cause, a very specific purpose. You may say, I don't have that purpose, Pastor. I don't work in government. I'm not on the stage. You're going to see in just a moment as we walk our way through this, your walk with God matters. Warren Wiersbe said this. Wiersbe said, God's work is never easy. And in these last days, it's getting more and more difficult to serve. The enemy is hurling ammunition at us as never before seen. And he is setting subtle traps where we least expect them. But the same great God who enabled Nehemiah to build the walls of Jerusalem will enable us to finish the course with joy for the work that He has called us to do. The book of Nehemiah is unique amongst all the books of the Bible. It begins with a prayer and it ends with a prayer. Chapter 1 begins with Nehemiah praying and telling us who he is as the cupbearer. But if you understand these 4 things, you'll understand the book. You'll definitely understand this chapter. If you'll understand his location, his vocation, his conversation, and his situation. His location, his vocation, his conversation, and his situation. In a nutshell, let me give you the most broad stroke I can give you of chapter 1. Nehemiah is going to get bad news, and then he's going to pray for the bad news. That's as simplified as I can make the chapter. Give me that graphic, Jan, Sue, whoever's back there. You got this in your church bulletin. You can see it. I'm going to walk you through it to help you understand who this guy Nehemiah is. On the far left corner, you see that he has a father named Hakaliah. Don't need to know him today, but you will eventually. He has a brother named Hananiah. And down in the other corner, you see that he is located in the Persian palace, in the king's palace, in the citadel. And on the other side, you see that he's just having a conversation with his brother and his friends about the Jews and Jerusalem. But the two in the middle, his job is he's the cupbearer, and what he's going to do is simply pray. That's the whole first chapter of Nehemiah in a nutshell. But let me back you up this morning. Let me back you up all the way to the start of the Bible. I haven't been with y'all for 3 weeks, so don't lose your mind to say, we're going to preach from Genesis to Nehemiah? Yeah, quick. Just listen. I heard someone say this week that the book of Nehemiah is heavy lifting preaching. If it's heavy lifting preaching, then it should be heavy lifting listening for you. So listen carefully. If you go all the way back to the beginning, I'll catch you up to Nehemiah to show you why he even matters. If you go all the way back to the beginning of Genesis, you see creation taking place. I'm not going to get into every little detail, but I'll give you the high points. Creation takes place. Man then sins against God. This sin begins to flourish, so God brings a flood through the life of Noah later after Adam and Eve. And then He starts the world over again through Noah, and then the people begin to repopulate. And then they get greedy again and build a tower to heaven, the Tower of Babel that God would destroy and scatter the people and their languages. And then we meet this guy named Abraham, who God says he will be a blessing to all people, and he would be the father of the Jews, and the Messiah would come through him. Then he has a son named Isaac, who has sons named Esau and Jacob. And then Jacob has a son named Joseph. Joseph is now the great-grandson to this guy named Abraham. Joseph has some jealous brothers who sell him into slavery and ship him off to Egypt. Then a famine happens in the land, and the people begin to move to Egypt to receive food because of the famine, and then they become the Egyptian slaves. So Moses is then commissioned by God to deliver the people out of Pharaoh and the Egyptian slavery. They wander through the wilderness for 40 years. Then a man named Joshua is commissioned to lead them back into the promised land that the Bible will call Canaan, who we would call Israel, the promised land. And when they go back into the promised land, their homeland, they realize that we need to set up judges for ourselves to rule. And they set up these judges. And then they realize, you know what, we need a king. So they appoint King Saul. And then Saul, after him, we have a king named David. And David will make Jerusalem the capital. Jerusalem, the place that Nehemiah says the walls are broken down. So David makes this the capital. And then David is followed. We have King Solomon who builds the temple, and the country is split into a northern and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom And the northern called Israel, the southern called Judah. Then the Assyrians take over the northern and the people are scattered and it comes to nothing. And the southern portion of Judah still exists where Jerusalem is. And it's taken over by the Babylonians and they destroy the place and they take the people captive. And some of them escape is what he's talking about in chapter 1, the people that escaped. And then the Babylonians are taken over by the Persians. So let me put it in modern day terms for you. Israel was taken over by Iraq. Iraq was taken over by Iran. That's the modern day country lines. Babylonians took over the Israelites, the Jews. Persia took over Babylon. And watch this. It was Nehemiah who was being raised up in Persia, who is now second in line to the king, to be the man that will restore Jerusalem. Why does that even matter, Pastor? You're going to see in just a moment. So let me make it as simple as I can. Jerusalem is taken over by Babylon. Babylon is taken over by Persia. And the Persian king has a cupbearer who's going to come and restore Jerusalem. Nehemiah is often just seen as this worker, this rebuilder of the walls. We often don't see him as anything other than that. If I would say to you that he's a foreshadowing of Christ, you would say, how in the world is a man rebuilding walls in Jerusalem? How in the world is that any foreshadowing of Christ? I can't make a connection between Nehemiah and Jesus. If I said Abraham sacrificing his son on an altar, you go, oh, that makes sense. Being sacrificed, Christ dying, yeah. If I said Noah, all the world being saved through one man, you would say, oh yeah, that makes sense. We're all saved through Jesus, through one, that makes sense. But if I said Nehemiah has direct parallels to Jesus, you would say, I don't understand that at all. Nehemiah is going to leave the comforts of the citadel, the palace, to go work on behalf of sinful and broken people. Jesus will leave the comforts of heaven to come work salvation on behalf of sinful and broken people. Nehemiah restores the broken walls. Christ restores broken lives. Nehemiah saw the people scattered and hurting. The Bible says Jesus sees us as sheep scattered without a shepherd. Nehemiah stands in the gap between God and the people. Christ stands on the cross or hangs on the cross between us and God as salvation for us. Nehemiah will be mocked and ridiculed. Christ was mocked and ridiculed. Nehemiah finishes the work of rebuilding these walls. Christ finished the work needed for us to have salvation. Both Nehemiah and Christ leave their positions for sinful people. Both Nehemiah and Christ sought intercessory prayer before they went to work. Both Nehemiah and Christ bore the burdens of others. That's just my introduction. Look with me in the text this morning, if you will. Chapter 1. The person that God uses. We see a broken man here and broken walls. Let me give you chapter 1 in one sentence. A burden that breaks the heart should lead to prayer that aligns the heart, and waiting on God prepares the heart. A burden that breaks the heart should lead us to pray that aligns our heart, and waiting on God prepares our heart. In the text, in verses 1 and 2, we are introduced to this man named Nehemiah. We are introduced to his family and we are introduced to his location. He has a dad named Hakaliah, a brother named Hanani. His location is that he is number 2 in line to the king. He's the king's cupbearer. But he is in the palace, the fortified citadel, the protected place. He's going to leave that protection to go on behalf of the Jews. But verse 3 shows us Nehemiah's conversation. So his brothers, who are still in Jerusalem, his brother is going to get some friends. They're going to make the trek to Persia. And when they get there, they're going to have a conversation with Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is going to say, how are things with the Jews and with Jerusalem? And he tells them 3 answers. The people are in distress, the walls are broken, and the gates have been burned. But then in verse 4, it's really where things start. You see his family, you see his role, you see him in the palace. You see the conversation. Then in verse 4, it says, so it was when I heard these things, or I heard these words. Watch this. Nehemiah says, I sat down and wept, mourned for many days. I fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Nehemiah's response was to weep and fast and pray. I think the missing link amongst everything today that we see happening is we have lost the burden and brokenness for those that don't know Christ. That doesn't even break our hearts anymore. That sometimes we see lost people and we're like, it should break our hearts. We should weep the way Nehemiah weeps for the people of Jerusalem. And he fasted and he prayed. I think we've just gotten way too chummy with God. We need to understand who He is and who we are. But then Nehemiah prays. And Nehemiah prays with an honest prayer, a sincere prayer, a real prayer. And it starts with the acknowledgement of who God is. And his prayer leads to this standing in the gap for the people. This prayer is filled with repentance and remembering and a returning to God and a plea for the redeemed, the family of God. And his prayer concludes the same way it starts. Oh, that's good, Pastor. Thank you so much. We appreciate all that information. What's any of that got to do with me? That's what I'd be asking if I was sitting where you're sitting. That's great, Pastor. Thanks for the information. I now know that Nehemiah is the king's cupbearer in Persia long before I was ever thought of. What's it got to do with us? How do we apply this text to our lives? How does it make any sense to us? How do we make this more than just information? I'm going to give you 7 things really quick. I have not been with y'all for 3 weeks, so really quick is a lie. I'm in no hurry. I love y'all. Number 1, God makes provisions for things long before you even know about them. God is making provisions for things long before you even knew anything about it. God was working behind the scenes in Persia to raise up Nehemiah before Nehemiah even knew Jerusalem was going to need him. God was working behind the scenes when the Babylonians took over Israel, already working to raise Nehemiah up to be the man that could come back and work a work that only God could pull off through him. God was working behind the scenes all the time in ways we don't even know about. God is working behind the scenes in your life and in your family to get you to this point today. God makes provisions for things long before we even know about them. Second, God uses people who have a burden and a brokenness for others. Number 2, God uses people who have a burden and a brokenness for others. In verse 6 it says Nehemiah stood in the gap. Look, church, sometimes this is going to be all you got. Sometimes you're going to have lost friends, lost family members, hurting friends, hurting family members, people who have been through loss, people who have been through struggle, people who have been through hurt, and all you're going to be able to do is go and say, God, I don't know how to help them. I don't know what they need. I can't mend their heart. I can't do anything. But God, I'm going to stand here in the gap on their behalf. And I'm going to say, God, I need you to get to them. I can't do it. If you don't, they're going to be left with no hope. So I'm standing in the gap for them. And all you're going to have is Romans 8:26 to say, God, I don't know what to pray, but you said if I'll keep praying and keep standing in the gap, your Holy Spirit will do what my words can't. God uses people to have a burden and a brokenness for others. That's the question on the table for us. Do we even have a burden and a brokenness for others? Do we even care if West Lincoln comes to know Christ? Do we even care? Do we look around our church and say, we're fine, Pastor? Do we even care? Do we drop to our community and say, there's my brother, I know him, he don't know Christ, he does, and we just go on like it's no big deal? Their soul is hanging in the balance. God uses people to have a burden and a brokenness for others. Man, I love y'all. I tell you all the time. Right there, I stand here before and after service, week after week after week, and I say, y'all my people. I love y'all. But I ain't going to be here forever, and you ain't going to be here forever. I want every person that we come in contact with to know who Christ is. I want us as a church to be overrun with humans. Why? Because that's who Christ died for. Humans. He didn't die for your little program or your little platform. Us, people, that's who He came for. And God uses people that have a burden and a brokenness for others. Look at me. Not just here, anywhere. If you're a person who doesn't come to church here and you're visiting today, you're off the hook. Anybody who stands in this post or any post like this at any other church as well, if he stands here and doesn't love you there, remove him. I love y'all, and I love this community, and God put me here for a reason. He put you here for a reason. He put us here for a reason. And that reason isn't for us to just sit around and be chummy with God. That reason is to carry out the message and the mission of Christ. Nehemiah understood the burden and the brokenness for others. He stood in the gap on behalf of the people. Number 3, any great work of God will be preceded by prayer. Any great work of God will be preceded by prayer. Look at verse 4. I've already read it to you multiple times, but look at it. And so it was when I heard these words. What words did he hear? Remember, his brother Hananiah had come and told him, Jerusalem has been destroyed, the gates have been burned, and the people are in distress. So when I heard these words, I sat down, wept, mourned, and prayed for many days. Matter of fact, if you begin to read chapter 2, you know what you'll find out? You'll find out that there were months that went by before Nehemiah takes his information back to the king. You know what most of us do? We get a burden for something, we sit down on Monday and we pray and wonder why it ain't happened on Tuesday. Some of us pray on Sunday afternoon, wonder why it ain't happened Sunday evening. Nehemiah prayed for months just for the people that he's not even with. Just for the courage and the strength and the wisdom to go before the king and ask if he could go and restore the people. Any great work of God will be preceded by prayer. Number 4. God worked on Nehemiah in private long before anything happened in public. Now, I've got to pause here because I'm going to deal with this more at the end. But in verse 4 it says that he prayed for many days. God did a work in Nehemiah privately long before he did anything for him publicly. Who you are in private is who you are. Number 5. Nehemiah started with God's character before he addressed the crisis. This is important to understand Nehemiah's prayer, church. Do you see what he said when he prayed to God? Before he even went to him with the crisis, he said, "Oh, great and awesome God, you who keep your word and your covenant with the people who love you." He went before God and he said to him, "This is your character, God. God, you can do this. I know you can. God, you are a God of character. God, you are not weak. I know who you are. You are an awesome God and you can do this." He started with God's character before he even addressed the crisis. You know what most of us do? God, fix this. God, make this situation go away. God, help this situation. And we fail to even acknowledge the power and authority of the one we're talking to. You may be saying, "Pastor, I prayed many times and God didn't come through for me. Pastor, I got hurt and God didn't come through for me. So how awesome and powerful is He if He didn't come through for me?" I'm going to show you at the end maybe just why. Nehemiah started with God's character before he addressed the crisis. Number 6, Nehemiah understood that God had him in his position for a reason and for a season. Nehemiah understood that God had him in his position for a reason and for a season. God did not raise him up to be the cupbearer to the king, just flippantly. God has you here today for a reason. God has you in this season of your life. You may say, "Pastor, this has been a great season of our lives. Don't squander it." You may be saying today, "Pastor, this has been the worst season of my life. Don't waste the pain." You may be saying, "Pastor, I have been dealing with stuff that I don't even know that I'm capable and understanding of what God is even doing." I promise you, if you'll take that confusion to God, He will give you some clarity. And He might not give it to you here, but oh, He will there, church. We need to understand this. We may not get every answer we want here, but one day we will. Or, like I've told you before, our questions just won't matter anymore. But Nehemiah understood that God had him in a position for a reason and a season. Look at me, church. I want to ask you this question this morning. Is your yes on the table? Well, I don't know what the question is, Pastor. It don't matter. Is your yes on the table? God of heaven, creator of heaven and earth, who sent your only Son, Christ, to die sacrificially for a sinner like me. My answer is yes, God, whatever you want. What are you calling me to? Doesn't matter. My answer is already yes. Or do you go to God like this? God, tell me what you're calling me to, and then let's talk about it. God, what you want from me, let's see if me and you can come to an agreement. You've been there, hadn't you? We all have. But we must put our yes on the table, regardless of what God's question is to us. But Pastor, what if He asked me to leave? Leave. What if He asked me to stay? Stay. What if He asked me, it doesn't matter. Do you understand the authority of the one you're under? I promise He knows better than you. Nehemiah understood that God had him in this government position as the king's cupbearer. Do you know what a cupbearer is? Most of you probably think a cupbearer is the person who takes a cup to the king. It says it right there in the name, right? He takes coffee to the king, wine to the king, food to the king. But you know there's another step in this process that most of us don't recognize? He don't just take wine to the king. He tastes the wine to make sure it's not poison so the king doesn't die. Every single day, Nehemiah tastes the food of the king's food, drinks the king's wine, and every day to make sure no one's poisoning it so the king doesn't die. Literally, Nehemiah every single day puts his life on the line for the king. Nehemiah understood that God put him in that position for a reason and for a season. And his yes was on the table. Number 7. Nehemiah repeatedly in the text calls himself God's servant. It's interesting to me that this great patriarch, prophet, or whatever you want to call him of the Old Testament, just simply refers to himself as a servant of God. Didn't look upon himself as anything other than a servant of God. He said it in verse 6. He said it again in verse 11. Look at verse 6. Please let your ear be attentive. This is him praying to God. Let your eyes be open that you may hear the prayer of your servant. Then how does he conclude? In verse 11, he wraps up his prayer by saying, Oh Lord, I pray, please let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant. Do we even see ourselves as a servant of God? Or do we see God as there to serve us? Do we see God as our genie in the sky? Do we see the Almighty as just an Aladdin that we would rub a lamp and ask Him for stuff? Chapter 1 of Nehemiah is nothing more than a servant of God by the book's namesake, Nehemiah, receiving information that his homeland has been destroyed. His brother and friends bring him the info. His homeland is in ruins. Therefore, Nehemiah pleads with God to allow him to return home and rebuild what has been destroyed. Not just rebuild it, but to restore God's people to true worship. Nehemiah is going to God in prayer before he ever goes to man for guidance. Nehemiah is broken. He's burdened for the people and for the work of God. In conclusion, I read about a pastor this week who was Church was doing great. Everything was going fine. Attendance was up. Tithing was up. Ministries were flourishing. People were attending. Everything was going great. He began to pray over the church's prayer list. He began to pray for you and pray for the people and pray for the community and pray for the local schools and the businesses and the shut-ins and the hurting and the sick. Those who don't know Christ, he began to pray for everything. And then one day, he began to recognize there was something on the prayer list missing. He recognized that nowhere on all the prayer list of all the stuff that he was praying for, that nowhere was there any prayer for his own heart. He prayed for you, and he prayed for your family, and he prayed for your situation, and he prayed for your job and your school, and he prayed for everything, but he recognized there was nowhere where he prayed for his own heart. Nehemiah teaches us something about this church. Listen to me. God did not do a great work through Nehemiah's hands until he first did a great work in Nehemiah's heart. You ever ask yourself this question? God, why don't you work through me? God, why don't you work greatly through me? God, I read the Bible, use me. God, I studied the Scriptures, use me. God, I can sing better than them, use me. I can preach way better than Jeremy. God, use me. God, I know the Bible, use me. God, I studied and got degrees, use me. God, I've been faithful to this place, use me. God, I've been giving my money, use me. God, I've been doing all this stuff, use me. Why aren't you using me? Has it ever occurred to you that just maybe God isn't working through your hands because He's trying to do a work in your heart? That He's not working through you because you ain't letting Him work in you. God's priority is not the work to do through your hands, but is first to change your heart. God may not be doing a great work through you because He's first trying to do a great work in you. This is what Nehemiah chapter 1 shows us. Before Nehemiah even goes back to Jerusalem, he spends time praying and weeping and fasting. And he lets God change his heart. Most of us want God to change all the broken stuff around us. But few of us want Him to change the brokenness in us. God, would you change my family? God, would you change my coworkers? God, would you change the people I go to school with? God, would you change my home life? Would you change this situation? But how many of us say, God, change what's in me? Change what's in me. If you don't ever change any of them, God, work in me. Change my heart. And if you choose not to work through my hands in any great way, then that's up to you, Father, but change my heart. Most of us want God to change all the brokenness that's around us, but few want Him to change what's broken in us. Let me tell you something. Everybody in this room today, I'm almost finished. Look at me, church. Everybody in this room today got issues. We got issues, church. All of us, every family, every worker, every student, everybody, every relationship, we all got issues. We need to stop the charade and come to God and say, I got nothing if you don't change me. I got nothing, Lord. What good is it if I succeed in ministry, but my own heart ain't right? What good is it if you succeed at what God has called you to do, but your own heart isn't right? God may not be doing a great work through you because He's trying to do a great work in you. Before God changed the city, He changed the man. Before God built the walls, He changed the man. Before God did a great work for all to see, He changed Nehemiah. Before God did any of the stuff that we're going to see in this great book, He changed Nehemiah. Today, will you let God change you? Pastor, you don't know what I'm going through. I don't have to know. Pastor, you don't understand how hard it is. I don't have to know. But I know this. If you'll let God change what's in you, then whatever He decides to do through you, it'll be fine. God didn't do a great work through Nehemiah's hands till He first did a great work in Nehemiah's heart. Let's stand together this morning. Lord Jesus, thank you for Mount Vernon. Thank you for the book of Nehemiah. Lord, do a great work in us today. Lord, change our hearts and help us to let you be in control of our lives. We love you today, Father. Please continue to use the book of Nehemiah for us in Jesus' name. Amen.